Welcome to Founders Future, a podcast powered by Closers.io, where we dive into the journeys of innovative entrepreneurs and explore the road ahead for them and their companies. I'm your host, Ammar, and in each episode, we uncover the stories behind impactful ventures, the challenges faced along the way, and the strategies driving their future growth. Today, we are absolutely thrilled to have Nicholas Capman, the founder and CEO of the FDA Group, a life science consulting firm that helps organizations assess the industry's best cons- access, sorry, rapidly access the industry's best consultants, contractors, and candidates. With a focus on quality assurance, regularity affairs, and clinical operations, the FDA Group supports clients across every stage of the product life cycle. Nicholas has led the company since its inception, building an award-winning firm recognized on the Inc. 5000 list 4 years in a row. He's also the author of The Passionate Workforce, a book that delves into creating and maintaining maximum employee engagement. Nicholas, welcome to Founders Future.
Thank you, Ammar. Appreciate it.
I'm excited to dive in. I always like
Likewise.
to start from the beginning. So, can you take us back to before you started your company in 2006, I believe? What were you doing beforehand, and what was really the motivation behind starting the FDA group?
Sure. I think I can answer both of those questions in one response. So I went to school originally to be a high school history teacher. And when I graduated, the state of Massachusetts was going through budget cuts. So they were laying teachers off, not hiring.
Hmm.
So the closest place that I could find a teaching position was in South Carolina. And so I told my grandmother, I said, "Hey, Grammy, I think I found a job and it's in South Carolina." And she said, "Oh, you can't leave." And I said, "I can't." And she said, "Of course not." And I said, "Okay." So that 7-second conversation changed the whole trajectory of my life. Needless to say, my first job out of college was selling phone service door to businesses.
Okay.
And the company that had employed me had hired all recent college graduates. So the kind of the talk in the office was get 2 years sales experience under your belt. Then you can go apply for pharmaceutical sales positions, selling pills to doctors, and that's where the money's at. So as a naive college graduate, I said, sounds fine. Got my 2 years experience, started applying for pharmaceutical sales positions. However, instead of getting hired by a pharmaceutical company, I ended up getting hired by a multinational pharmaceutical engineering firm that
Okay.
was owned by Novo Nordisk. And I was placed as the head of North American business development at the age of 23.
Mm.
To which some people say that's really impressive, to which I respond, you should be less impressed by me and more repulsed by the person that thought it was a good idea to make a 23-year-old head of North American business development. I did what most 23-year-olds would do. I made a lot of mistakes and I learned a lot of lessons. While I was there, I decided to get my MBA, and I had a professor that said he had started his first business, which was a bagel shop, at the age of 26. And I said,
Mm.
well, I'm 26, so I have to start a company. So there was a fraction of the business that did compliance consulting. That's a big portion of what we do. And I said, I think I can do that. So I created the FDA group. My goal was to make an extra $15,000 a year. I ended up leaving that organization, A, because now there was a conflict of interest, and B, because they were going through a merger. And there
Mhm.
was somebody else that had my role, and they were obviously better. So the writing was on the wall.
Yeah.
I ended up moving to a company that sold enterprise-wide software to medical device companies to help them with a regulation or a requirement called UDI, Unique Device Identification. It's just a complex thing, and so software helps. So I worked there, and I used to run the FDA group out of my car in the parking lot during my lunch breaks. And I did that for a few years, and the company kept doubling and tripling every year. And eventually I realized I should probably just stop everything I'm doing and
Yeah.
just focus on the FDA group. So that's how it began.
Very cool. I appreciate you sharing that story and all the different pivotal moments in your life. So, like, you were about to move to South Carolina, then you decided not to. And then, obviously, 23 years old, becoming the head of North American, I forget the exact title,
Business development.
business development. And then, so 26, you started it as a hobby. When was the moment where you were like, oh, wow, like I could really turn this into something and this could be my full-time thing?
So there were two things. First, was I ended up making more money with the FDA group than I was my full-time job. And so I realized if I just focused on my time and attention, I could expect more.
Yeah.
One thing I didn't mention is when I went to that enterprise-wide software company, I did end up taking one more job before I ended up leaving. And so I worked at a clinical research organization. Now, and at this point, I was working out of my home. Okay. And the truth of the matter is that 95% of the time I was honest, meaning when it was time to do my full-time job, I did my full-time job. I did
Yeah.
not do the FDA group. Now, I say 95% because none of us are perfect, and yes, I did deviate at times, but for all intents and purposes, I was nearly almost fully dedicated during work hours to that organization. So, if that's the case, when am I having time to do the FDA group?
Hmm.
After my job is done. What typically do people do after they leave their job? Spend time with their family,
Go eat
right?
food, see family, friends. Yep.
Yeah. So I was married with children. So I would wake up, work, I would end my day, go eat dinner, come back to my office and work until midnight on the FDA group. And
Wow.
so I was doing that every day. I was in my 20s, so I was late 20s, so I still had a ton of energy. So that the burn didn't bother me. But eventually my wife knocked on the door and said, "This isn't working. You can't just keep doing this. I don't
Yeah.
see you, I don't know who you are," so on and so forth. And so I would say the fact that I now was beginning to make enough money to support my family and then some. And then the fact that she was reminding me that life is not all about me and my ambitions, that there's other people involved,
Yeah.
brought reality back to me. And so that was the pivotal moment.
Yeah. Where you're
Mhm.
like, okay, I'm gonna leave my full-time job and then focus all my time and energy on the FDA group.
Yep.
Powerful. It's always good to have those types of people in our lives where they can recalibrate us in a
You
sense.
don't always appreciate it during the recalibration, but when you look back, you do appreciate it.
Yeah, 100%. So let's fast forward and give the listeners a little bit more context into the FDA group. Who is your ideal customer? Who's your ICP? Who do you love to work with? And then from there, what are the different offers and services that you provide?
Yeah, I'm going to look to my left because we have our core target written down. So or I'm sorry, our core focus. So it is US based hiring managers of life science companies who need quality, regulatory, clinical, and other technical resources. And I say US based hiring managers, it doesn't mean that we only do work in the United States. We do work globally, but when you're dealing with the US based hiring or purchasing person, the business culture is homogenous, and so I
Yeah,
understand what to get. When you start to go outside, there just tends to be a bit more complexity and it takes more time, so we really
yeah,
focus on that. The services that we offer service areas are, and I'll keep it kind of high level, quality assurance, regulatory affairs, and clinical operations. Simply stated, those are our focus areas. And then we have three different engagement models. So we do staff augmentation, consulting, and full-time employee recruitment. So whether as people are trying to figure out, I've got a quality project, a regulatory project, a clinical study, I need to execute it, but I'm not exactly sure how. Should I hire employees? Should I bring in temporary contractors? Should I outsource it? We feel like we can assist in each of those areas.
okay, very interesting. So let's dive into each one of them and take a little bit more time fleshing this out. So you've got the staffing, you've got the consulting, and you've got the FTE recruitment. What do you feel is the bulk of the revenue? Is it one specific one? And then can you dive deep into each one of them in terms of if I'm on the other side, if I'm a hiring manager, what are the pain points that I'm typically going through that you guys solve, if that makes sense?
Sure. Full-time employee recruitment is a newer service offering, so it really makes up a very small percentage of our overall revenue.
Got
So
it.
we are 53% staff augmentation and 47% consulting.
Got it.
When I say staff augmentation, temporary resources, fractional support, part-time, full-time, et cetera, et cetera. Consulting is either high-level strategic advice or project-based work. And then I'll go a little bit deeper. So within the three categories, quality, regulatory, and clinical, where those are not all evenly distributed. So
Yeah.
we're 75% quality, 16% regulatory, and 9% clinical. I would say one of the areas that we help solve that is different than our competition
Yeah.
is we live in a world between contractors and consultants.
Mm.
So when people say the word consultant, they think high-level strategic advice, short-term, and very expensive.
Yeah.
When people think of the word contractor, they think of low-level, lower level, somewhat inexperienced, less expensive, but requires a lot of hand-holding. So I would say the space in between contractor and consultant, which is the space that we occupy, I would call us subject matter experts.
Mm.
Those are individuals that can do the high level vision of the project, but also participate in the execution of it. So instead of a consultant creating the vision and passing it over to the company so they can hire a bunch of contractors, our team can come in and both provide the high level strategic thinking and then also that's those same team members can also execute. So if you think about the story of Goldilocks, right? The one bed was too hard, one was too soft, one was too hot, one was too cold. We're right in that middle.
Yeah. Very interesting. And when you say the team members come in and execute, are those the internal team members that you have in your organization that can come in? Or
Correct.
are you bringing in? Okay, got it.
Yep.
Because I wasn't sure if the staff augmentation basically means like you're connecting them with temps and stuff like that, or temporary.
So it's not a matchmaking service, so they're all representatives of the FDA group.
Got it. Okay, very interesting. So that's very unique as opposed to what I'm typically seeing. Now, what does a typical client engagement look like? Like, how long are we typically working together? Is it very custom depending on the individual? What does that look like?
Yeah. I'll give you a very unhelpful answer, which is it depends,
Yeah,
right?
fair enough.
I would say a short-term engagement would be something like a 2 to 3 day audit of their quality system, or it could
Got it.
be 10 to 20 hours of regulatory consulting so that they can understand the regulatory pathway for approval. Those are probably the smallest engagements.
Yeah.
The biggest engagements we get into are probably audit projects where we can do dozens to hundreds of audits within a year, or remediation projects as it relates to an FDA enforcement action. Or so there's FDA when they come and do an inspection, there's a 43. Just to turn this into an analogy that people can understand, a 43 is if you got pulled over and got a written warning.
Mm.
Okay. A warning letter is the next level. That's like a ticket.
Yep.
And then a consent decree is they take your license away.
Mm.
Okay. And they're all obviously different levels of severity. So if the FDA, if a company goes into consent decree, then they're limited or unable to ship product. The alarms are flashing, everybody's aware. The purse is wide open because until we fix this, we're out of business. Those generally can last a year to several years, and they
Yeah.
can involve dozens of people. So those are probably the two largest projects that we get
Got it.
involved in.
Got it. Okay. So it really depends, depending on
Yeah.
what that particular person needs. I'm curious for you. Let's shift to the back end of the business. How do you generate leads when you're looking to acquire more clients and customers? What does that lead gen process look like?
Can you define lead gen? It sounds simple, but I just want to make sure that I'm answering your very specific question.
Yeah, so lead generation, basically anything that you do to acquire more customers, to increase brand awareness, to book meetings, book calls, to any sort of business development, essentially.
Okay. So I would say one is traditional sales, outreach through phone calls, emails, LinkedIn, conferences, things of that nature.
Yeah.
And then there's marketing
Mm-hmm.
that we have a blog, we do white papers, create case studies, we do webinars. I myself have a podcast which gets some publicity. And we also have a subscription-based newsletter called the Insider
Mm.
Newsletter,
Cool.
where a lot of companies will take, and I apologize if I'm getting a little too esoteric, but they'll take guidance documents, regulations, warning letters, things that people in my industry care about, and they'll blast it out over the internet. And people will say, oh, yeah, I was looking for that, and that company shared it. That's great. Our insider newsletters, we take it and then we analyze it, right? So let's say the FDA said, all right, if you're going to make a medical device and it has glass in it, now here's the new formula for the glass that we're going to allow. If it doesn't match this formula, you can't use it. And so the person that cares about that information will say, okay, that's good, but what does that mean? Where do I get the ingredients? How much do they cost? Will it go in my processing equipment? How quick can I access it? What is the timeline it takes to turn this into glass? So on and so forth. So we take those aspects and then we put it into a newsletter that's also audible
Mm-hmm.
that people can then say, okay, now I understand not only what the FDA is expecting, but how now I have more access to information so that I can implement those changes or react to what the FDA
Yeah,
is
yeah.
coming out with.
Very cool. Okay, so you mentioned a lot of different kind of strategies when it comes to generating more leads. What have you found to be the most effective for driving new business revenue?
Focusing on your current clients.
Interesting. Can you elaborate?
Yeah, so generally, you're not going to get a multi-million dollar project from somebody reaching out to you of the internet. They're going to reach out to you and they're going to say, I need help with this project.
Mm,
And you go and you help them.
yep.
The people that they're going to be giving those 6 and 7 figure contracts to are people that are approved suppliers, preferred vendors with master service agreements that have a long history of execution within that organization and support.
Yeah.
So the key, if we're talking about increasing revenue, is to once you get into an organization, do, my father said, you don't have to do a lot more than everybody else, you just have to do a little more than everybody else. So figuring out through the client's journey from the moment they visit your website to the moment the project ends. Every touch point is going to influence the way they feel about you.
Yeah.
And it's either going to increase positivity or increase negativity. So during all of those touch points, what are we doing as an organization to, for lack of a better term, give them the warm and fuzzies? And also to instill trust,
Yeah.
because the formula for trust is character times competency.
Yeah.
So if they believe we lack character, there will not be trust. And if they believe we're not competent, there will not be trust. So we have to demonstrate that we have both character and competency. And then obviously beyond that, do the work.
Very interesting. As it sounds like you've grown it to a point where you're removed from those client touch points. Is that accurate to say to not every single project?
Absolutely not.
And the reason that I ask that is because you make a great point there of making sure that you're focusing on your existing clients and you're really giving them an amazing experience. How do you instill that culture in your employees to where they want to operate like that and they want to have that standard of care with all the clients that they work with?
So there's two answers. The first answer is that we implemented EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System by Gino Wickman.
Yeah.
And if it's you're nodding, so I assume you're familiar with it. So I'm a big advocate of that. In other interviews I've had, they say, what kind of, actually, I shouldn't, you might ask me what advice I'll give entrepreneurs. Are you going to ask me that or not?
I might, yeah.
Yeah, all right, I'll save that to the end because I have a very direct way of answering that. And what I won't be saying is try hard and never give up. I'm not going to say
Yeah,
that. So EOS, I would say, is the tangible
got it.
way in which we are able to accomplish that. The intangible way, I would say, is through the methodology that created my book, The Passionate Workforce. Essentially, you and I and everybody listening at one point or another has felt passionate about their job.
Mm,
And we all know what that feels like, right? When you're really passionate about your job, you don't get a case of the Mondays, you show up early, you care about the quality of your work, you're innovative and creative, you're helpful, you do all you engage in all these different behaviors.
yeah.
Similarly, we have all at one time or another been resentful. Same person, different behaviors. We
Mm,
don't show up on time. We don't care about the quality of our work. We do get a case of the Mondays. We're not helpful. We'll badmouth the company. We could even become destructive, right? So I have 15 pillars that we measure. And the theory is if we can, when we use the NPS scoring system, so if we can get a 9 or above on average for each of those 15 pillars, then that is telling us that we've created a culture where people feel passionate. And therefore, we believe if they feel passionate and they have the correct supported structure through EOS, then we will be getting optimized performance from each of our
mm.
employees.
Wow, I love the way that you broke that down. And passion is truly an infectious feeling. If you're around people that, or if you're engaging with a company that their employees feel that passion, they're gonna associate that with your organization, which is very powerful.
Yep.
I'm super curious, after all your experience, when you look at the current landscape in 2025 and you look at your organization, what do you feel like is the biggest challenge you're facing to scaling it up even further?
There's all sorts of different. I was just talking about this. It doesn't matter if we're in the 90s, the 2000s, or in 2025. The vision I have in my head, if I could paint a picture, is we're all going down this road of business, and two things continuously pop up in front of us: obstacles and opportunities.
Mm,
And so you have to know the direction you're going, and you have to be ready, able, and willing to adjust and adapt to the different obstacles and opportunities that get presented.
yeah,
Um, so that didn't answer your question, but I think it was worth mentioning. So our biggest obstacle, I would think, is probably scale. We're fully funded and we have no outside capital. If we were to want to scale the organization to become something significantly bigger than it is my belief that we would need to partner with a private equity firm that is willing to invest in our organization so that we can. I mentioned earlier on that we have kind of three service areas: quality, regulatory, clinical. You'll notice they're not all evenly distributed. And the reason for that is because if everything's important, nothing's important. We're really good at quality. We cannot take our eye off that ball. Okay. So if we were to get outside capital, I know what I would need to create in order to get the regulatory portion of our business to be equal to quality. I
mm,
know what we would need to do in order to get the clinical staffing portion of the business equal to quality.
yeah,
Okay. And trust me, I'd love to do everything all at the same time. And I've realized that is a measure that would prove unsuccessful.
fair enough. Is that something that you foresee? in the near future for you in terms of,
Depends on your definition of near.
yes, 2, 3 years?
You're right on the cusp.
Yeah,
I would say it's probably going to start, the process would start in 2 to 3 years, not be completed.
nice.
Yep.
That's exciting.
Yep.
Very exciting. Now, you alluded to this. What advice would you give to new entrepreneurs that are starting out?
Get your MBA and implement EOS.
MBA, really?
Yep. Yeah.
Why?
You don't have to be an expert in everything, but you have to understand it. So, a really good example is if I didn't have my MBA, and this doesn't speak to everyone, but it does speak to a significant portion of the population that's listening. If you look at a balance sheet, there's a whole bunch of numbers, right? You have to be able to translate those numbers into a story.
Mm,
And then that once you have that story, then can make decisions. It's not a scoreboard. It's not there for me to look and go, good for me, or woe is me. The
yeah,
reason I'm getting those numbers is so that I can evaluate and analyze it, so that I can make decisions moving forward. So that's one example where if I don't understand financial statements, I can't translate those numbers into a story. Therefore, I won't be able to make good decisions.
yeah. Very
And
interesting.
so I think that applies to all aspects of business, human resources, marketing, sales, branding, operations, finance, accounting, so on and so forth.
Awesome. Nicholas, I appreciate your time today. Thank
Okay, it was my pleasure, Ammar.
Thanks.
Appreciate you inviting me.
What's the best way for people to reach out to you and the FDA group?
So you can reach out to me on LinkedIn is the best way. Nicholas, last name is Capman, CAP is in Peter, MAN. And then the FDA group is just that, thefdagroup.com.
Awesome. Beautiful. So that wraps up another insightful episode of Founders Future. To our listeners, if you enjoyed, don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. And if you're a business owner and you're looking to scale your company and really enhance your sales and marketing efforts, visit closers.io to discover how we can support your growth journey. Until then, keep on climbing.